Ashton Rodenhiser is a visionary creative entrepreneur on a mission to revolutionize the way we think about drawing. She believes that everyone can harness the power of drawing as a thinking tool. In this episode, you'll learn about the art of sketchnoting, you'll discover practical tips for getting started with visual note-taking, and explore the benefits of incorporating drawing into your learning, note-taking, and communication skill set.
I thought at one point that I wanted to be a sign language interpreter. So in order to do that, you have to take it in the city. And I had just finished a 2-year college program and was considering going into this other program, but you needed to take some prerequisites. You had to take some ASL classes before you could even get accepted. And so I had to move to the city to take those, and got a job that I really liked, ended up staying for 4 years, and took the prerequisites to get into sign language school, but I didn't end up doing it. Not really any reason other than the fact that I did want to move home and I didn't want to have to travel back and forth, because I wanted to stay at that job for a little while because it was really good skill building opportunity for me. And yeah, things just kind of changed direction for me, so I ended up not going down that path, but was the primary reason why I decided to move there in the first place.
Right, okay. So you've kind of always been into alternative or less common ways of communicating, should I say. So, sign language is a way to communicate with deaf people, but for you right now, what you're doing is, you're trying to communicate with people in a way that, apart from blind people, but I guess, there's Braille, everybody can understand. It's a universal language, which is drawing or graphic note taking. So when did you kind of become aware of graphic note taking, or, when did this come across your radar?
Yeah, so the job I was just telling you about, some of the skills that I was learning there was around like community development and facilitation. And I really fell in love with the idea of how you can help groups of people move through whatever it is they're working through to get to some sort of goal, and allow them to kind of come to their own understanding by just navigating the conversation, asking the questions, feeding back to them what you're hearing. It's less about you knowing the information and more about creating that safe space to help them navigate their own thoughts. And I really fell in love with that concept and that way of working. And when I moved back home, I wanted to try to continue to do that a little bit more, but it's a little difficult to... at the time, I didn't have a business. I didn't have a consultancy practice or anything. I was quite young still. And I was just trying to connect with other facilitators in this very small place, and there's not very many of us. So I started volunteering a lot and trying to put my facilitation skills into action on a volunteer basis. And one of my now very good friends that I was volunteering with, he is a facilitator. And he told me about this one-day workshop that was happening in the city on graphic facilitation. And I've always been very creative. I think I probably, if it would have been supported more, maybe I would have been an artist, some sort of artist. I don't know what I would have been, but I probably would have been some sort of artist. And honestly, I took that one-day workshop and that was it. It was this beautiful coming together of all things creative, which I've always really loved, and this facilitation side where you can feedback, harvest what you're hearing in pictures instead of words in those types of settings. And that was like almost exactly 10 years ago. It was like October or November of 2013. So yeah, and I really fell in love with it and decided a few years after that I would create a business around it and really kind of go all in on it.
Nice. And for the listener that doesn't know, what is graphic note taking, and like how is it better than, just writing down normal bullet points like most people would?
Yeah, so most of us think in pictures, right? And of course, I'll just get the cliche out of the way now. A picture's worth 1,000 words, right? Most people resonate with imagery, and sometimes I'll also use YouTube as an example because it's the second largest search engine in the world for a reason, right? We want to see things. We want to visualize things. We want to see someone making something. And it's just our natural way of being in the world. It's just everything is very visual. So it almost is odd now that, I think about it now when we traditionally use note taking in the classroom when we were younger, it's all words. And for some reason, along the lines of when you're in elementary school, you go from drawing all your pictures before you're ready to write all the words, then to just all words in like a matter of, going from one grade to the next. And I just find that such an odd shift that we make. And it's almost, I think it was just maybe almost unconscious. I don't even know. But we want to help kids write in words, so we take the drawing away, which I just think doesn't make any sense at all. And when we use drawing, we kind of have to redefine what drawing is. And unfortunately, most people along their life some way had some sort of experience where drawing was, or any kind of like creative thing that they were doing was squashed or squandered, right? Most people have that experience. They either remember or they just have this like inner feeling of like, oh, I'm not creative. Oh, I'm not an artist. Oh, I can't draw. Oh, I can't do this. But, creativity is such a skill set. It's just like a way of being that is just innate to us, that like I really truly believe that everybody is creative in their own way. It's just they might not be creative in a traditional sense, right? Maybe you're really good at making people laugh, like that's being creative. Maybe you're really good with words. Maybe you're really good with taking pictures on your phone. Like we're all creative in really different ways, and it doesn't have to be, putting pen to paper. But I also believe that everybody can draw, in the sense of if you can write letters, you can draw, because letters are just drawing in disguise, right? Letters are just lines. They're circles, they're swirls, they're zigzags, whatever, right? And those are the core elements of drawing, right? So doodling as an art form is a really like non-threatening way for people to be creative, because it's just like, oh, I'm just going to do a doodle. And because it's called a doodle, it doesn't really mean anything. But doodling in a meeting or in the classroom can actually help you remember more information, up to 29% more. Right? So there is stats and studies, though I'm not going to like run them all off now because I'm not the best like stats and studies person. But they are an incredibly powerful tool to help yourself think and engage in a different way in our brain that helps solidify that information. And when I started this path down like graphic facilitation and live illustration as like for others, I started to really experience the power for myself and for the people I was working with, which is why I really decided like to kind of dedicate my life to learning how to do this really well. And then several years ago, I was like, this is a skill set that I really believe everybody can learn, even if you don't consider yourselves creative or you're not you don't know how to draw or what have you. Like you can learn the drawing skills in a very short amount of time and benefit from the value behind, visual note taking and sketchnoting.
There's a big movement now as well for people to not let their youth die, or that youthful energy die, because when you're a kid, you draw something, you think it's fantastic, you give it to your parents, they say it's fantastic, they put it on the fridge, or they frame it whichever way around you want it to go. And it's like you said, writing is technically drawing in disguise, because
right.
if you couldn't write, you couldn't hold a pen, which means you couldn't do this, or you couldn't type on a computer and all this kind of stuff. So in the idea that, let's say, the person listening now hasn't drawn or considered themselves someone who can draw for the last 10, 15 years, ever since they left, preschool and all those types of places, how do we get started with sketchnoting? What does that look like in a meeting? Let's say, for the most boring, or one of the most boring professions going, I'm an accountant, I'm in an accountancy meeting. How can sketchnoting help me make this into a more memorable experience, and where do I start?
Right on. I will definitely dive into that, but I want to comment very quickly on something that you just said about, when we're young, they say it's fantastic and they put it on the fridge and all of that. But my first career was actually as an early childhood educator. And one of the things that we learn as ECEs, which is mostly 0 to 5 years old, is when a child creates a piece of artwork, you're not supposed to, quotation, tell them it's beautiful or say that it's pretty. Their artwork and their drawings or whatever they're creating is meant to open a conversation, right? So just as an early childhood educator would talk to a child about their artwork, that's how I see sketchnoting and all these other types of things. Art creates a conversation, right? Sketchnoting helps deepen that conversation, right? Tell me about the color you used. I really like how you did that zigzag line. Like, why did that connect over here? Right? You ask questions to help them prompt in their thinking and explain further. So I just wanted your comment about, just sort of like, oh, you put it on and it's like people say it's beautiful, right? I think that's where there's a bit of that disconnect, because then there's focus on the product versus the process, right? And the beauty of sketchnoting is in the process of it. I do teach the aesthetics of it because people want a sketchnote that looks nice, and I totally appreciate that. And I've worked very, very hard over years to create sketchnotes that look nice, especially when they're for clients. They better look pretty decent, right? But yeah, I just wanted to comment on that before I kind of go into your next question.
Yeah, no, definitely. I mean, that makes sense. And as well, because you're, more educated on this topic than I am. I don't have children. I've never worked with young children in, a professional setting. That makes perfect sense that you should be using it as a trigger point to kind of go, hey, that's so cool. How did you make that green? How did you make that orange?
Exactly.
And I'm sure there's parents out there that obviously knew this already, but I had no clue. So, you're educating me on this already. But yeah, how do we use sketchnoting in our meetings, or, in our day-to-day lives? What does that look like, and where is it applicable?
Yeah, so I think sometimes when we use the word, like when we start talking about sketchnoting and visual note taking, people automatically go to the extreme of like, oh, now we have to draw everything and I don't know how to draw, right? And then that just closes the door. But sometimes it's even just a matter of just incremental shifts by small percentages, right? So if you capture all in words now, maybe you capture 98% words, and you start to add in a little bit of visual elements, just very, in small ways. And then over time, as your confidence grows and you start drawing things over and over again, and you build up that muscle memory, maybe you can shift it. But the writing is still always going to be really important. Like content is always going to be like king or queen of your sketch notes. So you're going to still have a lot of information on there. One of the first things that I encourage people to do is to throw away lined paper and start capturing on plain paper. So if it's white or if it's purple, it doesn't really matter what color the blank piece of paper is, but most people have printer paper lying around. Just grab that, throw it from vertical or portrait style to its side. And those two small shifts alone just kind of tell your brain, like, something's different here. Like, what are we doing? I'm going to capture my notes, but the paper looks different. Where are my lines? Like, what is happening? So even just that small shift forces you kind of out of that traditional note-taking sense of just capturing line after line of information. And with sketchnoting, you have to trust yourself a little bit around how much information to capture and trying to synthesize. And the beauty that I think sketchnoting and visual note-taking helps solve the issue when you're in a meeting or you're in a classroom. A lot of times when people are taking notes, if they're typing them, they're just typing words like a mile a minute, or they're writing down everything that they're hearing as quickly as they can. But you're missing the most important part, which is the thinking part, which is the part where you listen to something and you're trying to make sense of it and then you capture it down, right? So sketchnoting, visual note-taking add in this extra element of the thinking, right? Because sometimes when you just capture all your notes on line paper and then after you're like, what did they just say? Like, what just happened in that meeting? Like, I have no idea. I have all these notes, but I don't remember anything. Right? Because we skipped that part, which is pretty darn important, of the thinking, of the making sense of what you just listened to. And when you have to be thinking while you're listening, and then add in a little line or a little square or a little stick person or whatever you want to do to help visualize it, that's just going to reinforce that thinking that you did, that you could just do in words, but because we're visual, most of us are visual, engage in a visual way. It's just going to be more of like, once you kind of get over and you learn some like little drawing skills, it just becomes more of a natural way of capturing. And the first element that I always teach is how to draw a line, right? So we're not talking rocket science here when it comes to drawing, right? And how you can use simple elements like a line to help emphasize different things. So a line, you could create a sketch note that is just information and lines, and it would look pretty nice. And it probably would help you remember more too, right? Because a line can help you connect, can help separate, can help highlight, can help show flow of information around a page, right? You can do a lot with very simple things like a line. Turn that line into an arrow, turn that line into a square, right? Just simple shapes to kind of get you started.
Mm. And so let's say we're now sketchnoting, and for us, we're new to it, so we're going to do a lot less writing, a lot more thinking. So we might take the highlight words of what we're talking about here. We might have, for example, now, okay, I've got the word podcast and I've put a line between it, and I've put guest, and I've put another line, and I've put story. So these are kind of three buckets I want to fill up. So, all right, we're doing the podcast. I've got the guest. Now, what's the story type thing? Now, let's say I'm in the story bucket. How can I draw my notes to kind of get an idea of what's going on in my head? What's the kind of formula we're using here? I've already got the lines down. I've drawn 3 lines. What's the next step past the lines?
Yeah, so it's about how you can use these drawing elements to help you connect to the information on the page. So every sketch note is going to look different, so I can't tell you the exact formula that you're going to have to do, but lines, if you have information spread around your page or in a certain area, you can use a line to kind of help show flow of that information, or use an arrow. If you want to start like grouping, let's say you have one piece of your paper and it's all the same kind of idea, you can use something what I call a container. Now, a container can just be something as simple as a square or a little speech bubble or a circle or some sort of, just really basic shape to help show that information belongs together, right? You can also draw like stick people if you want to. I think it's important to draw people on our sketch notes because a lot of times people are represented in what it is that we're talking about. But you can upgrade your stick person to a star person, right? Like the little head and then like little like pointy arms and legs and then you can move them around a lot easier than a stick person. So it's kind of like embracing like happy little accidents, like channeling Bob Ross a little bit when it comes to what it's going to look like, because even when I'm doing it, and the majority of the time it's live in real time, right? Like when you're in a meeting, you just don't know what's going to happen. Like you don't know what people are going to say, right? So if you just have some of those foundational elements, like, okay, I know lines, I know arrows, I know containers, I know people, choose a couple colors, and you can go from there, right? And then once you kind of start playing around with some of those, after you capture information around your page, then you can start adding in, building in what I call your visual vocabulary. So those are things that are a little bit more illustrative. Like we're starting to get into more of like traditional drawing. Whereas most of the time when I talk with people about it, I introduce the concept of icons, right? So drawing icons that have multiple meanings. So for the first couple of years, and I didn't know how to draw very well, I would just throw a light bulb on everything because it's easy to learn how to draw. You can change it up from time to time. You can even put a little smiley face on them if you want to. And most of the time, there would be something in that meeting or in that session that kind of came up as like a top highlight or something like I really wanted to remember. So I would stick my little light bulb, right? So I'm starting to add in a little bit of visual imagery in a small way, right? That's kind of not too scary. But ideally, you start to learn visual icons that have more than just one meaning. So you can use them in a variety of different ways. So like a magnifying glass can represent focus. It can represent analyzing. Like it can represent multiple ideas. So once you kind of learn a few simple icons to get started, then that have multiple meanings, and you can just like start drawing them over and over and over again on your sketch notes. And then you just kind of build on that muscle memory, and then you just learn more and more little drawings and how to connect information. But I would say the most important thing to shift our thinking in when it comes to capturing the information on the page, like I said, that's still going to be very, very important, is instead of, in traditional note-taking on lined paper, we capture in long lines, and then we go underneath and we capture in long lines. You want to capture your information in your sketch note in like an invisible box, right? So I call it blocking your content. So if you have a sentence, you're going to write like 2 or 3 words, and then you're going to go underneath, and you're going to write 2 or 3 words, and then underneath. And it's never going to be a perfect square. It's never going to be a perfect invisible square. But if you can imagine, now you have a blank piece of paper, and you've got these little invisible like squares of information all over the page, and now you have room around those pieces of information to add in your lines and your arrows and your containers and your little icons and things like that. So, hopefully that's helpful.
Yeah, no, it makes perfect sense. And now I'm kind of thinking about like, in a corporate context, or, in a business, everyone's quite big on mind maps, which is just circles and words connecting to each other. Yeah. Now, I'm assuming this is much more developed and much more engaging as opposed to the old kind of mind map technique that we're used to. So how does this kind of help organizations to, I don't know, how does it help organizations, I guess is what I want to ask.
Yeah, well, I'll comment on the mind map because I get that quite a lot. It's like, oh, it's like a mind map. I'm like, it is, but it isn't. I think it's a beautiful way for people to relate to it and how it might look like. But the way that I see mind map, which I still am a fan of mind maps, but I see it as more of a template. You're filling, you are building it as you go, but it's still a very structured way of capturing information. It has like rules, whereas sketchnoting doesn't have there's a lot more flexibility. There's no rules necessarily with sketchnoting. You can add as many or as few drawings as you want. You can capture however you want, right? Where mind map is like, you put your idea in the middle, put a circle around it, and then you branch out from there. So, and templates can be a really nice way as an entry point into it, because sometimes encountering a blank page can be very, very intimidating, which is why I always tell people like throw a title at the top, and now you don't have a blank page anymore. It's like less scary. But when it comes to businesses and organizations, I love working with folks who like the information is really complex, right? It's very, you're trying to move through, and gain clarity on something. When you're in situations where there's multiple voices, it's a really beautiful way to really showcase that people feel heard and valued in the room, right? So you throw out an idea there, and usually I call myself a graphic facilitator or a live illustrator when I'm in those scenarios. And someone throws an idea, and here I am capturing what they just said, right? Whereas a lot of times when we're in these types of settings, people throw out ideas, or there's really loud voice, or what have you, and you don't know if what you said was heard. You don't know if it was even a good use of your time to be there. And then a lot of the time, the outputs from those types of meetings are reports, which are all words, and they get stapled and put in a drawer, never to be seen again. So when I work with people, I'm like, no report here. You don't get a report because you get the graphic that represents everything that was just said. And if you want a report, you can write one. You can go ahead and do that, but I'm not doing that for you because the visual is really helping reflect what it is that they're trying to move through and get towards, right? And then I've had organizations hang them up in their hallways or their lunchroom as this additional accountability tool. So there's this sort of engagement in the room, which is really beautiful to allow people really to feel engaged and heard and valued and seen. And then this output at the end that now you can actually go on and do your work and you can see what it is that you were trying to accomplish or trying to do.
Yeah. And you know what? I think what you're doing is the future. You know, there's going to be a lot more people hiring people like yourselves to come to their conferences or their talks and create this graphic that then gets sent out afterwards, as opposed to here's a recording of the whole thing for you to watch. It's like, no, here's the graphic. You were there for that. It will trigger the right parts of your memory and get you going. But
Exactly.
for the for the people out there that kind of go, okay, I've got this graphic now, what do I do with it? You know, what is the kind of aftercare of having the graphic? How do I utilize this wonderful piece of art or this wonderful memory kind of storage solution to its full capacity?
Yeah, well, there's this other stat, if I can get it right. It's, if when you take words and pictures and you put them together, it increases action up to 89%, right? So by having the graphic and hopefully reflecting on it can help you increase your action that you will do something with that information. So I do a lot of conferences, like you just threw out conferences. I do a lot of those. And most of the time when we're in these events, there's so much information, right? And exactly what you said, we can't expect people to go and watch a recording, 12 hours of recordings. Like that's just not happening. Right. So, and because we live in a bit of this instant gratification world, it actually kind of is really good for that in a sense. And so by having this graphic to reflect on after, print it off and hang it and put it on your desk or hang it on your wall, you can look at it very quickly. It will take you back to that conversation and go, oh, right, I remember when he said this and then he told that funny joke. Okay, that was that point. Oh, right. And I remember I want to try to do that in my meeting next time, or oh, I need to incorporate this security protocol, or oh, I got to look up that program that they used, or something like that, right? Where it's a great opportunity to quickly reflect, take you back to that conversation, remember what you wanted to remember most about it, and then have that increased opportunity for action, which I would like to think that most speakers at a conference or most so-and-sos ahead of a meeting want you to actually do something with whatever they just said, right? So if you can increase that action, I think that I think it's more benefit than what people realize. Then sometimes they want the illustrator to do the thing in the room and it's cool, but sometimes I don't even think they realize all the extra value benefits that they're getting from it, like that increased action. Yeah. Let alone using it in your marketing for next year and showing your sponsors that, this was the output and how great was it and all that kind of stuff, right?
Oh, yeah, no, most definitely. I was at a conference last week, and the guy that was running the conference, this guy called James Sinclair, who's a pretty decent entrepreneur over here. The reason I say pretty decent, he's not, Warren Buffett or anything like that, or Elon Musk, but he's a big entrepreneur here. And he had these flip charts that he was going through, drawing, and he wasn't, drawing pictures per se, but making a graphic and drawing it and then, notating on it there. And it's very kind of, intense because you're watching him do this, you're watching him create it, blank sheet of paper, now there's a graphic on it, now there's a word there, he's drawn a line between the two, he's telling you this and this and how to do this and that. And at the end of the conference, when we were packing up everything and getting out of the venue, one of his assistants ran over and was like, what do you want me to do with these? He's like, oh, keep them, because I'm going to use those for YouTube videos in the future. Like, they're already there. You know what I mean? I'm going to make sure that I use these again because now they're my thoughts actually put down. So it was really interesting to hear how you said that these kind of get used. One thing I would ask you as well, though, is you're, by every definition, a creative entrepreneur. You're a creative that is making a living from creation. What does that look like day to day? What does that look like for you, in the beginning versus now? I'm curious.
Do you have another hour to talk about this? No, just kidding.
Of course I do.
Oh my gosh, those first few years were a bit tough. I'm not going to lie. And I'm really, really glad that I persevered through it. Because I was building my skill in the craft of what it is that I do while also building a business. And it was quite challenging. And I didn't have any experience building a business. I didn't take any business classes. Like, I really winged it big time. Really had no idea what I was doing. And I did look in and lean in on inspiration from others in this field. Like, it's very small, but we're a bit of a tight-knit worldwide community. And because of the nature of the work, everybody has a business. So I call it, I looked for the evidence, right? You could certainly look for the evidence of starving artists out there, but I was like determined not to pay attention to the people in the field that weren't doing well. I was really dedicated to focus all of my attention on others that are doing it. I'm like, if it's possible for them, it's possible for me. And I just had to constantly remind myself that it is possible and that others are doing it. So there's got to be a way, you know. There's certainly things that I would have changed. You know, I didn't invest in myself as much as I should have in the beginning, you know. But there were certain things that I'm really glad that I did. Like, I really worked on my mindset. I read books on rejection, right, to get me through those hard points of every time I would get on a sales call, I'd be absolutely terrified. Every single time I got a no, I was absolutely gutted. It was a hard go there for a while. And of course, I got lots of no's because of so many different reasons. Either it was the pricing, or it was my energy, or I just didn't explain the value enough. So it was like those first few years were a lot of trial and error, and I'm glad I sort of muddled my way through. And I feel like I am kind of on the other side. It's more just working with repeat people, and people see me at an event and I worked with them. You know, I'm not having to do as much putting myself out there as I've had to. And even with COVID, I was 100% in person before COVID. So then overnight, I had to take my in-person business to online. And so that was quite a learning curve, right? So it certainly has had its ups and downs over the years, for sure. But I am glad that I've persevered, and I really am finally kind of on that other side over the last little while. And which gives me this opportunity that I've been wanting to do for a long time, is like, you know, you don't have to just hire me to illustrate your conference or your meeting, but you can learn how to do this for yourself, whether you're a student or you attend a lot of meetings or you just want to do it for fun. We should probably mention that it's fun, right? So, you know, it's allowed being able to kind of have this flexibility in my business to be able to add in this piece that I've been wanting to do for a really long time, is to teach people, because, you know, I just want more people to experience the power of how they can visualize their ideas and information. Yeah.
Yeah. I'm glad you mentioned that idea of, like, in the beginning you were struggling because you didn't know how to set your pricing. You said your energy might not have been right and the value proposition wasn't there. I think a lot of creatives can kind of, you know, take the same energy they've put into learning their craft, whether that's, you know, music or drawing or whatever it is, and take some of that hard sweat equity of, you know, doing something each day and getting better bit by bit by bit into business skills. And you learn, you know, the basics of sales, dealing with rejection, knowing how to put your price in the right place, or, you know, talking to the right people that are ready to pay that price or see the value in what you're doing, which is, you know, infinitely, like, a skill that you should know is basically sales. People say if you know sales and marketing, you'll never be poor. I'm like, okay, great, you know, but you can't tell that to a creative person because they're more focused on the, oh, this, you know, gives me joy, it really feeds my soul. It's like, yeah, but you gotta sell, you know what I mean? And selling, you can't sell with any soul in it, unfortunately. Selling is selling, and there's an art form to it, you know.
Yeah, it is definitely a funny thing, because when you get a no or rejection as a creative person, it's extremely difficult to not take it personally. Like, no, they're not attacking my work and my creative. Everything about it is like my creativity, and it's not that they're saying no. They're just saying no to the service and not no to you as a creative. Or so it is and yeah, you really do have to work on your mindset to get out of that starving artist mentality, because that can just like hold you down so much. And I do speak to a lot of creatives and folks who are, anytime I get an opportunity to speak to like young people about entrepreneurship, I'm like, yes, pick me, because I'm like, me with the weird business. you can do it. Like, it's possible to be creative and be a successful, like, have the flexibility that you want when it comes to being an entrepreneur, right? It's probably maybe a good and a bad thing that I am a bit of a workaholic. Like, I do love to work. I do, and I am fascinated by business. So by having that, maybe the workaholism was a good thing in those first few years, because I just wanted it so bad that I was like, I've always had kids while building a business, right? So also trying to raise like small humans and build this business, it was tough there for a little while, and it is fun to, now that my kids are a little bit older too, and how they talk about what it is that I do. They're like, "Oh, mom's drawing pictures for someone again," or what, or they like to tell people I'm an artist, and it's really cute. I really like it. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, in this day and age, job titles are just like not even a thing of the past. They're just really strange and all over the place. So yes, technically you are a full-time artist as far as they're concerned, and then for you, you're like, no, I'm a sketchnoting, whatever professional. But there's all kind of weird titles out there. There's like people that have done this thing called agile whatever, and they call themselves lean black belt Sigma 6. All these weird titles, and it's absolutely ridiculous. But
I love changing my title. I change it all the time. I've been calling myself a professional doodler lately because it's just fun. It's like, what? You're a professional doodler? Like, what the heck does that mean?
Yeah, well, that sparks conversation.
It's just fun.
Yeah, no,
it's just fun.
And that feeds back into what you were saying earlier about getting the value right and getting everything to do with what you do correct. If you say I'm a professional doodler, people go, what is that? Suddenly now the conversation is going from a different place, from you going, oh, hey, there's this thing called sketchnoting, and if you do this and do that, then it does. It's like, that's not what's selling to somebody. Someone's going to buy from you because they believe in what you're doing, or they're just curious about it. So you mentioned that you want to teach people this. What does that look like? Where can they get you to teach them these things? What kind of things can they expect to learn on your course? That kind of thing.
Yeah, so I really kind of took the last, well, I guess at that point it was like 8 years of learning this skill for myself and the trials and tribulations of all of that. And I really felt like a beginner content was missing in this field. And a lot of the stuff that you see are people like me who've been doing it for a long time. So I went on this journey to write the Beginner's Guide to Sketchnoting book, and it took me about 1.5 years, which isn't too bad, but I really leaned in on this philosophy by this guy named Rob Fitzpatrick. He has a book called Write Useful Books, and I was really on a mission to write a useful book, because what happens a lot of the time is with nonfiction, you get to the end of the book and you're like, what did I just learn? Did I just learn what the title was? That was pretty much it. Like, they're idea books. And I did not want to write an idea book on sketchnoting and why sketchnoting is great and what it's good for and blah, blah, blah. Like, you just got that from listening here. Like, you can skip all of that. Like, you can Google those things, right? But someone who's like, oh, I want to try something different that's going to help me, right? They don't need to like read 500 pages of why. Right. So once I sort of heard and leaned in on his philosophy, I sort of set the wheels in motion. And one of the things that he kind of encourages people to do too is the beta reading process. Right. So I did 3 and a bit, because I had to rewrite a chapter, 3 and a bit beta reading rounds where I got feedback from people. And that was such a valuable learning experience while writing the book, because it highlighted things that I thought were common sense that were not for people, and things that I was missing or things that people were confused about. And it really helped me be able to really stay grounded and rooted in the idea of trying to write the most useful book as possible. So when someone gets to the end, they're like, I can sketchnote now. right? It's not a long book. It's mostly drawings, drawings that help just reflect what it is that I just wrote, right? It's mostly drawings. And really to try to make this learning the skill as easy as I possibly can, right? Which is why some of the things I mentioned earlier about like draw a line, then draw an arrow, and like things that just start to like build upon each other. And so yeah, that I put that out a few months ago, and just sort of in a space of talking about it now with folks to try to get it out there a little bit more for folks that are interested in kind of learning this for themselves. But absolute like emphasis on the beginner of the beginner's guide to sketchnoting, because if you have some art skills, cool, like that will benefit you, but you really don't need to have any previous experience to kind of get into the book. And so that's, I think, going to probably be the most common way for people to kind of get into when it comes to learning from me. And I'm like revamping my YouTube channel, so I'm going to be putting some more stuff out on there too. But everything Sketchnote School is what I've called all of my things. I have an online community. We had a guest speaker in there today. It was so fun talking about his journey, like using sketchnoting skills, but like drawing maps. That was really cool, right? So all these different use cases for it too. It doesn't always have to be, oh, I heard information, I drew it down, right? I posted something in the community too of a recipe. So I took a picture of my soup and then I drew the recipe over top of the picture, right? So just trying to like expand your mind and how you could also use the skill in so many different ways.
Yeah. Well, okay, good. So yeah, go out there, get the beginner's guide to sketchnoting. You're going to change your life with that. Something that's been really impactful for me is this drink called Magic Mind. It's like a energy drink power shot thing. And it's for focus, for energy, and for less stress. It's got a whole bunch of nootropics in it. It's got lion's mane mushroom, cordyceps mushroom, rhodiola rosea, ashwagandha, L-theanine, turmeric. But genuinely, for me as an entrepreneur, it's been life-changing.
Yeah.
I'm able to kind of get through the day without these caffeine crashes and these peaks and troughs in my energy throughout the day. And I've got a discount code for listeners of the show. The discount code is stringcast20. So if you go to magicmind.com and you pick a subscription or you pick a one-off purchase, you can use the code stringcast20 for 20% off. And genuinely for me, that's been absolutely life-changing. But it seems like you do a lot of learning. You've mentioned, books in general, and you mentioned a specific book just a minute ago. Do you have any other kind of books that have stood out to you, or any kind of podcasts or YouTube channels, basically places where you've done your learning to become the entrepreneur or businesswoman you are now?
Right. Yeah. So I definitely consume. I'm more of an audiobook person, just because I don't always have hands free with kids. Course, right. Yeah. I can take the dog for a walk and listen to a book, or be watching them play and be listening to a book. So I'm more of an audiobook person, but I do consume a ton of business books, in particular money books. I read a lot of those. I would say my favorite book that I've ever read when it's come to kind of business is called Overcoming Under-Earning by Barbara Stanny. I think she's a Husson now, Huson. But I think her book is still in Stanny. Her last name's Stanny. And it's this concept of like, you could make very little money and be an under earner, but you could also make a decent amount of money and still be an under earner, right? It's more about tapping into your skill set and your potential and your belief system around money, and how what we say and think about money and our actions, and how we can kind of align those a lot better. And it's a very interactive book with exercises and activities and things like that. Her dad was actually one of the co-founders or the founder of H&R Block, but he didn't teach her about money. And he basically said, like, find a nice guy to take care of you. And ended up in a bad place with her husband owing like over $1 million in taxes that she had to figure out a way to pay back. So that's probably that's always usually my go-to one when people are trying to like figure out how to rewrite their beliefs around money, because you're in business for a reason. And there's passion and the vision of what it is you're doing, but it's also to make money, right? Because if you're not making any money in your business, you don't have a business, right? Like you can have all the passion and all like the gumption in the world to get that message out there. But if you're not getting that energetic return in a form of money, you don't have a business. So especially from a creative standpoint, and creatives tend to have such a not so great relationship when it comes to money. So, those are sort of the ones that I tend to, I am a bit of a minimalist. So, and I don't have a desire to create a gigantic company, right? So there's like Essentialism by Greg McEwen. I think I'm bad with last names. And there's one called Company of One, right? So there are like, basically like find what resonates best with you and find a book that's going to help you walk through that idea, right? Like those kind that I just spoke about, because I think it's so easy to fall into the trap of like how you're supposed to do it, which is what you normally see online, right? That's the supposed to do it. And so sometimes it just takes a little extra work to find the YouTube channels or the books and stuff that resonate with the way that you want to run your business. And it doesn't have to be from a very like rah kind of do this or you'll suffer kind of energy or scarcity tactics and that kind of stuff. Like you don't have to run a business that way, right? And I think that took me a long time to realize, like I can run my business in a way that is really authentic to me, but also, I don't have to kind of like get sucked into that kind of thing.
Oh yeah, no, 100%. And there's a lot of people that will say to you, oh, you need to grow your business, you need to get some employees, you need to, take some funding on, that will help you do this and that. It's like, if I'm making enough money to live, I'm happy with how I'm living. What's wrong with that? If I can maintain this over time and I've got the skills to keep clients coming in or keep clients coming back every month or every week, what's wrong with this?
Yeah.
And I think that's a message that definitely needs to be put out there more,
Yeah, like show up and do a good job for the people that want to work with you. Like build relationship, right? Like a lot of the people I've worked with this year are just repeat clients that I love working with. Like I had a call with one last week and they want to talk about their events next year. And I told them, I was like, you guys are my favorite. I'll drop anything for you guys. Like they are my number one people. They hire me for multiple things a year. Like they alone could be a full-time job. Like I love them to pieces and they're so respectful about what I do. And, sometimes it takes a while to find those people, but when you do, just like keep showing up and just being amazing and it will just sort of work itself out.
Yeah. And that's part of entrepreneurship is, believing as well as doing customer service or, having good client relationships. And, one thing that's obviously quite clear here is that you have clients, you have your business, it's running very well. And I've been asking people this, kind of on and off over the however many episodes I've done, but I'm wondering like, what is the vision for your business or what is the mission? Because, a business without a mission doesn't really sell so well. So I'm wondering, what is the mission of your company or your business?
Yeah, usually what I like to say is I help people break down complexity using visual language, right? And so I think you're asking me this question at a really interesting time because of the launch of my book and really changing. I'm in a bit of a transition space of, I'm not really doing as much of the live illustration work and I'm more taking the leap into the education role, which in its own right is just like opens up a whole other different space for me because I am more visible, right? Like I am talking to you, my face is out there. Whereas I've spent all these years hiding behind the graphics, like let the graphic do the talking, right? Instead of Ashton. So for me, the mission and vision of the business is trying to get this skill set in as many hands as possible, right? And less about me spending as much time being the illustrator, because I can't impact as many people in that way. They can experience it for a point of time, but now I'm trying to be more like, how do I get that marker into as many hands as possible so they can experience it on an ongoing daily basis even. And whereas, instead of me just being there for a point of time. And yeah, so that's sort of, I might have answered this question a bit differently a year ago when I wasn't kind of ready to be fully in it. But now that I'm in this kind of transition space, the mission and vision of the business kind of has shifted from there. Instead of providing these experiences for people to really feel valued and have that long-term impact on an individual basis, it's more about how can I get this skill set in as many hands as possible in a non-threatening, low barrier to entry, in a way that feels really authentic. Whether you have $10 or $100 or more, it doesn't matter, right? The skill set should be able to be used for anybody, no matter what their background or ability is. Mm. Yeah.
I'm kind of following on from that. What is it about what you do that brings you the most joy?
Well, recently, because I've been in this new kind of vision space, it's every time I see someone try, they, I have a little online community, like I mentioned, and every time a new person joins and shares their first sketch note, it just makes my day. And I think they think I'm exaggerating, but I really am not. Anytime I see someone put pen to paper in any kind of form, I just totally geek out. So it's mostly those things recently where it reaffirms for me my vision, and it opens that door to create that safe space for people to share, what they say is a not so nice looking sketch note or drawing. But yeah, that's what's really bringing me a lot of joy lately, is just seeing people share and feel comfortable sharing, and us just being able to celebrate, because creating your first one is the hardest, right? It really is. I think that's that for most things in life, right? Just taking that first step can be the most challenging. So that's what brings me the most joy in my work recently. Yeah.
Where can the people find you online?
Yeah, so if you want to learn how to sketchnote, it's pretty easy. Just go over to sketchnote.school. And I've got my newsletter, my community, my book, all of the links to everything is on there.
Thank you for listening to People Explained. New episodes come out every Monday. We would appreciate it if you gave us a review on Apple Podcasts and shared this episode with a friend.